I'm Greg Nawrocki from the customer team in the Globus department at the University of Chicago. So today I'm going to give an introduction to Globus for ALCF users. So the plan is that I'll give some background on Globus. Now, I'm sure some of you are pretty familiar with Globus, but just in case, it's always good to give a bit of background for those that aren't. And then I'll do a demo. I'll kind of drop in and do some transfers to or from ALCF resources. We'll use Theta, Cooley, Theta GPU, and Grand. I won't really discuss Globus sharing in depth here or demo Globus sharing in depth. Lalitha is going to do that in the subsequent demo on Eagle sharing. So I'll talk a little bit about it when I do the high level stuff just to give some background for that talk. So Globus is a not-for-profit service developed and operated by the University of Chicago. And really the key here is that, it was developed by researchers for researchers. A lot of us have been where you are, we've seen those problems, we know what you're up against, and so that's why we developed Globus. So our mission is to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of researchers engaged in data-driven science and scholarship through sustainable software. The key here is the sustainability, right? Sustainability is thriving, not just surviving. Now, Globus has had a 20-plus year history in science and 10-plus year history as our service. So we want to make sure we're in it for the long haul. We want to be available and usable by you many, many years into the future. So the history of Globus is we were largely grant-driven. So grants from the NSF, DOE grants, that really drove kind of that 20-plus year history of Globus. But grants are tenuous and they dry up. And then what happens after that? This is where we kind of came up with that idea for the subscription-based service. Because again, the key here is sustainability. We want to be here many years in the future. So how's that subscription model working out for us? And so how's it really working out for you? Here's a small selection of the current Globus subscribers. And we have over 50% of the Carnegie R1 institutions, and that's all but 2 of the top 25 research institutions in the United States. We've got a pretty good selection of the Carnegie R2s and R3s, so some of the smaller universities as well. We've got about half the US DOE national laboratories, as well as some multinational .orgs, and even some commercial companies in the mix. So we've got a large section of people that are currently subscribing, so really helping us towards that goal of sustainability. It's always fun to show our stats slides and talk about all the people out there that are using Globus actively. But one of my favorite stats slides is this one. And this is something that we announced in last October. So the Globus service to date, or actually to date then in October, had transferred an exabyte of data. So we're pretty proud of that. So let's talk about some of the key capabilities of Globus. What does Globus do and how does it do what it does? So Globus delivers fast and reliable data transfer, and you'll notice that I crossed out the word big here. We're always thought of as the big data transfer guys, and yeah, that's certainly something that we do. However, what about those large collections of small files, or even just those files you want to make sure get from point A to point B reliably and securely? Sharing and platform services, I'll just touch upon these in this presentation. Directly from your own storage systems, obviously that's what we're going to talk about here, the storage systems already part of ALCF. Via software as a service, I'm going to show you our nice, neat web browser interface. Using your existing identities, we're not an identity provider. We like to use your existing identity provider so you don't have to remember yet another username and password, all with this overarching goal of unifying access to data across all tiers. Okay, so what does this mean? This means we want to make all different types of storage look like one thing, and that's a Globus collection. So whether it's cloud storage, whether it's POSIX-based storage, doesn't matter. Crazy object stores, doesn't matter. They all look like one thing, a Globus collection. And you can use those Globus collections with the Globus service and with some of our platform services to do those things that are going to make your life a lot easier as a researcher. So when I think of this, I think of the where, the who, the what, and the how. So first off, the where. Where's your data stored? And you can see we have connectors for just about every type of storage out there, including cloud storage, popular object stores. We've got connectors for Amazon S3, for Box, for Google Drive. We recently announced a OneDrive in that mix. We've also got Google Cloud. And we're always looking to add connectors. That's one thing, we're always in our future-facing roadmap, one thing we're always thinking of. And so we've got planned Microsoft Azure Blob Storage, and perhaps even Dropbox in the future. So always looking forward to those different types of stores we can abstract as a Globus collection. So for the who, as you all know, research isn't done in a vacuum anymore. Not only do you have to work with researchers within your own institution, but also researchers outside of your institution. You may have shared grants with those outside your institution. So how do you get data to those that need it? How do you interact? How do you collaborate? Well, Globus is a tool that is going to help you do just that. So the what? Globus is always kind of known as being installed on these large research computing clusters, but we've also developed a bit of a sweet spot for getting data off of instruments. So, instrumentation, these are essentially user facilities, right? People come in and they use these and then fills up that local disk, and the next person's waiting in line and would like to get their sample run on these machines. And so what happens? What do you do? Well, with Globus, you can have it on the instruments, and you can actually automate that transfer to make sure that that data is transferred off the instrument up to your analysis store, up to your long-term storage system, so you can get the work. Not only can you get the work done that you need to do, but that next person in line for the instrument can use it. So for the how, I will demo our web-based GUI interface, but note that we also have a Commandline interface, as well as we expose the REST APIs that the web interface and the Commandline interface consume. So with the Commandline interface, it is written in Python. It's actually open source on our GitHub site. And if you're a shell scripter like me and you like to do a lot of your automation in shell scripts, the Commandline interface is absolutely perfect for that. So as I mentioned, we also expose our REST API. So let's say if you've written some applications like portals, science gateways, maybe some publication services, and you'd like to integrate Globus into those applications, well, you can use our REST APIs and our Python SDK to integrate the Globus services right into your own applications. So I'm going to tie it all up here in one slide and hopefully kind of make a synopsis of everything that we've learned in the previous slides. So when we think about Globus, we think about three things. We think about transfer, we think about sharing, and we think upon building upon those with our platform services. So in this first use case, we have a researcher transferring data from an instrument to a compute facility. So this could also be from one compute facility to another. It could be from a laptop up to a compute facility. Doesn't really matter as long as Globus Connect is abstracting that file system and abstracting the file system as a Globus collection. You can transfer data between any two collections. So in this case, from the instrument, this request may be manually initiated with the web app. It could be something that's automated with the Commandline interface or the API set. But when the transfer is initiated, Globus is going to transfer those files reliably and securely. Okay, reliably in the sense that this is a fire and forget transfer. If this transfer takes 2 days, 3 days, doesn't matter. This researcher can log in and out of the Globus web app. Once the transfer is initiated, Globus is going to do the babysitting of that transfer. So what does that mean? That means if the network connection glitches up and down, we're going to pick right up where we left off. We're going to do checksumming to make sure what you see is what you get. We're going to send an email upon file completion. We're going to allow you the ability to, as I mentioned before, log in and log out and check on that transfer. securely in the sense that that transfer can be encrypted. In some instances, an endpoint owner will force encryption, in which case data only comes into or leaves that endpoint if it is encrypted, and you have no choice to turn that encryption off. Okay, so that researcher got her files up to her compute facility, and now she wants to share it out. And as I mentioned before, Lalitha is going to discuss this in the next section on Eagle sharing. But from a high level here, what's going to happen is she's going to select a set of files and say, I want to share this set of files with a particular Globus user. That Globus user doesn't have to have a local account on the compute facility. So Globus is going to control access to that. There's no need to do a double hop transfer where you push those files up to a cloud storage system so somebody can pull it down. Not only can that be expensive in time, but also expensive in money with the size of files that we as researchers deal with. So this collaborator is going to log in using their Globus identity that those files have been shared to them with. And they're going to be able to access those files and transfer them down to their own Globus endpoint. In this case, it happens to be a Globus Connect personal endpoint on a personal computer. But as I mentioned before, there's no local account required. The download happens directly with Globus. It happens with Globus, but the files do not go through Globus, and I'll show you that in some architecture slides that are coming up next. Last thing is building upon these with our platform services, and this is simply using our Commandline interface, using our API sets, our Python SDK. We're going to give you that platform so you can build your science gateways, your portals, your publication services, everything you do so you can automate your research workflows and ensure that those that need access to the data have it. This is all done from the comfort of your web browser or using our platform services. Accessing just about any type of storage out there. We saw our various connectors that we had for those storage systems, and using your existing identities. No need to go get a whole new username and password to use Globus. So let's talk a little bit about Globus security features. So whenever you start talking about moving files around or sharing files out with collaborators, people can get a little nervous about the security of what's going on there. So, Globus is an identity broker. We don't store user credentials. That's all done by your institutional identity provider. So as such, you manage all those identities. Globus really doesn't have any control over that. The institution controls the access policies, so endpoints managed under a Globus subscription, the endpoint administrators of that have a certain level of control as to who can and can't share, who can and can't even use Globus on that endpoint. And then the researchers that are allowed to use Globus themselves have a fine-grained access control to their collections. So it's really kind of this multi-level control that various individuals have control over. Data remains at the institution. It's not stored by Globus. I mentioned we're not a cloud storage provider, so you're always in charge of your data until you specifically share it out. Data doesn't flow through the Globus service. It goes directly between the endpoints and the collections. Again, I'll show that in a subsequent architecture slide. There's integrity checks of that transferred data. I mentioned the checksumming we do to make sure what you see is what you get, and that data is actually what it says it is. We have very high availability and redundancy. The Globus service runs in AWS, so always accessible, always available, highly redundant. There's any files that we might maintain, the metadata files that we maintain in order to make sure the transfer happens. Like I said, we don't store or see your data, but we do have to track certain things like file names, path names, certain aspects of those transfers we need to maintain so we know the transfer is happening successfully. Any of that data that we store, we encrypt at rest. So Globus is a hybrid SaaS model, and what that means is not only do we maintain the Globus service, that globally accessible multi-tenant service that runs in AWS, but there's also a component that you need to install on your local storage to instantiate an endpoint, and that's Globus Connect. And Globus Connect comes in two flavors. That's Globus Connect Server that runs on multi-user Linux systems, highly tunable, and Globus Connect Personal, which is really more designed for single-user personal workstations, laptops, things of that nature. So you'll see here that once Globus Connect is installed on your file system and it abstracts that file system as what we call a Globus collection, the transfers now happen directly between that source collection and the destination collection. There's no staging. The data doesn't flow through the Globus service at all. However, you'll note that our service is the arbitrator of that transfer, and so the control channel is what is doing the orchestrating of the transfer, what's telling the endpoints, the Globus Connect software to do that transfer and monitor that transfer. So in the case of Globus sharing, the architecture in the data channel section is really divided into two domains. There's the subscriber control domain, and there's the external user control domain. So in the subscriber control domain, you as a subscriber are able to manage an endpoint. And managing an endpoint is simply a Globus term for saying this endpoint is part of the subscription. And once it's deemed part of the subscription, you can enable certain features. One of those features is sharing. So you're allowed to go in, provided you have permissions by your local endpoint administrator, to set and share out files and directories for users that exist outside that control domain. In other words, they don't have local accounts on the file system that a managed endpoint sits on. So once you do that, as an external user then, you're allowed to come in through the Globus control domain using Globus overlay permissions to essentially act as a local user on that endpoint to do a very specific set of things, and that could be read or read-write to a directory. So in the case of being able to read from a directory, you can then download the data or transfer the data to your own endpoint. And in the case of a read-write directory, you could also push data up to that endpoint. So if you wanted to do something like where you're hosting a data repository where external users are pushing data up to you. So I'm not going to dive too much into this. As I mentioned, when Lalitha does the demonstration on sharing from the Eagle system, hopefully this will all become clear. So the software that instantiates those endpoints, freely available on our website. You can find them, download and install them from our website. Globus Connect Server, that's for the multi-user Linux systems. And Globus Connect Personal is what you're going to install on your personal workstation and laptop. And actually, when I do my demo, I will do a demo of Globus Connect Personal installation on Mac OS. So let's go ahead and do our Globus demo here. I'm going to show you how to authenticate to the Globus web app using your ALCF identities, show you how to link in other identities, take a quick tour of the web app and show you the Hamburger menu and how to do file and folder management with it. We'll do a transfer to and from ALCF resources. I'll do it between ALCF and our research computing cluster at the University of Chicago, but that could be any other research computing cluster you may have access to, Exceed resources, other things like that. I'll do a Globus Connect Personal installation. We'll do a transfer to and from your personal workstation, your personal laptop, up to ALCF resources. So let's go ahead and log into Globus. So you can either go to app.globus.org, or if you're on our website, globus.org, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a login button. Just click that and you'll get redirected. So here we are on our login page. There's many ways to authenticate to Globus. So we have Globus ID, which is our own lightweight identity provider. We've got Google IDs. So if you have your Google ID or your G Suite ID, you can authenticate with that. ORCIDs, you can use your ORCID if you've got one of those. And then we have logins for various organizations. So you could look up your home institution. In this case, we're going to use ALCF. So there we go. The Argonne ALCF is an identity provider we can use to authenticate to Globus. So let's click that and continue. It's going to redirect me to the ALCF IDP. And let me put in my username here. And we'll get a password, a fresh password from MobilePass, and put that in. Click Sign In. And now the Argon ALCF IDP has authenticated us to the Globus web app. And we can see that if we go to Account here and click on that. You'll see, sure enough, my ALCF identity is the account that has been used to authenticate to the Globus web app. A neat feature about Globus Auth here is I can link in other identities. So when I log in as one of those other identities, it carries with it the authority of all the identities that have been linked in. So here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to link in my Argon identity. So it's going to redirect me to another IDP. If I put in Argon National Laboratory, there we go. Click Continue. And let's put in my username and my password and hit Login. I'm now authenticated as both my ALCF identity and my Argon ID. So these are now linked together, and if I come back and log in with my Argon ID, it'll carry with it the authority of the ALCF identities as well. So that's real handy if you are like me and are duly appointed or wear different hats and have different identities. You can link all those in to make your research data management life a little bit more easy. If you decide you don't want those identities linked together, you just simply go over to Manage Identities, and if I hit the trash can here, it would unlink my Argon identity. But let's go back here to the File Manager, and you'll notice I am not authenticated to any endpoints yet. If you recall our conceptual architecture slide, you'll remember there's 3 places we need to authenticate. We need to authenticate to the service, which we just did with our ALCF identity, but we also need to authenticate to both endpoints. Now that said, you may auto-authenticate to one of these endpoints, and I'll talk a little bit about what auto-authentication is as we go into the demo. One item of note is that your web app view may look like this, which is the single panel view. I prefer the 2-panel view because I always think of transfers between 2 endpoints. So let's go ahead and authenticate to an ALCF resource, in this case Theta. So in collection here, I'm going to search for Theta, and sure enough, ALCF DTN Theta comes up. If I click on that, I'll be taken to the endpoint, the collection here, and it says, please authenticate to access ALCF DTN Theta. Click on Continue. That's going to take me to a familiar login here. Use my username and grab a password here. Sign in. And there we go. Okay, so I am authenticated as what's called a mapped collection because I'm mapped to my local account here. And this is my home directory with the files that one would expect. In fact, I shelled in earlier to Theta, and you'll see I've done an ls here, and those are the files indeed in my home directory. I wanted to also show you the Hamburger menu here in the web app. If you click on that, it's going to expand this menu. And this menu allows you to do things like general file maintenance. So let's say I wanted to delete this file. I could click on that and then delete it. I could rename it. I could add new folders. It's just a handy way to do a little bit of file maintenance without having to shell in. Now, the last thing here is you notice the download and upload are grayed out here. And sometimes people get to this point and they're like, well, I can't move that file. Download and upload are grayed out. Well, download and upload are specific to HTTPS transfers, and endpoints have to be specifically enabled to do that, and most aren't. And really what we're trying to do here, and I'll show you the demo in a minute, is we're actually doing transfers, not uploads and downloads. So if you get to this point and see that, don't panic. You're going to want to use transfer, not upload or download. So let's go ahead and do a transfer. So in order to do that, we're going to need another endpoint, another collection. So let's go, and I'm going to use our research computing cluster at the University of Chicago called Midway. I type in Midway to the search collection, and sure enough, UChicago RCC Midway shows up. I click on that, and I'm going to be directed to authenticate to Midway. And let's see, let's log on with my UChicago IDP, log in, authenticates, and sure enough, it's going to take me to my home directory structure on Midway. So let's say I wanted to transfer this file1.txt file from Theta up to Midway. If I click on that, remember the upload and downloads aren't going to work, but the start here is going to start a transfer, and away it goes. So when a transfer starts, you're going to see that it's submitted up here, and you can actually drill down and view some details on that transfer. And here you can look into the event log. Obviously, a small file is going to go very quickly. Started, progressed, and succeeded. You can get some overviews on that transfer as well. Some stats here on that transfer. But again, small file, so it's going to be really easy to transfer. And if I refresh here, it shows up here. Okay, great. So that's an easy small file transfer. Now let's transfer from Midway to Theta, but let's use this 10 gig file, so a little bit larger file. There are some transfer and sync options here. So you can actually label this transfer. We'll label it Greg's 10 gig exfer. And there's some transfer settings here. If you're transferring directories or collections of files, you can do things like sync those files only with where the checksum's different, file doesn't exist on the destination, file size is different. So these are handy things if you're doing replication or you're doing backups. Again, you could delete files on the destination that don't exist on source, again for replication purposes. Preserve the source file modification times. This is, who cares when the file was transferred? I just want to know when it was last touched. Verify the file integrity after transfer. This is the checksumming. I'm going to leave that enabled. Encrypting the transfer. In this case, I can turn it on and off. If there was one of the endpoints forcing me to do a transfer, that would be checked and grayed out. I could not disable it. Skip files on source with errors. So if you're doing, again, multiple files, it's not going to error out in a single file. And fail on quota errors. So if we exceed a quota, it's going to actually fail on the transfer. It's not going to just keep trying. Again, remember, with Globus, it's fire and forget. It's going to keep trying that transfer until it can do so no more. I believe a week. If there's no activity within a week, it'll finally fail. But it's going to keep trying that transfer until it can succeed or fail out after a given time period. Okay, so those are the transfer and sync options. Let's go ahead and do that 10 gig transfer. If I click on that, we're going to transfer up to here, and I click start, and away it goes. So we'll just kind of let that go in the background. It should take a few minutes to get that file moving. And if I refresh here, sure enough, there it's moving very quickly, actually. So that should complete in a few more seconds. So you'll notice here the transfer task in the activity menu turned red. So we've got a problem with that transfer task. I'm going to guess it's because I've exceeded quota, but let's find out. If I drill into that transfer task, sure enough, I see this transfer, warning storage quota exceeded. So I've got to go make some room in order for that to succeed. So let's go back to the file manager. I'm going to delete that 50 gig in file here with the Hamburger Menu. Delete that. Okay, so those files are deleted, and this task should now resume and succeed. Sure enough, it did just that, and the file did indeed transfer in its entirety. Since transferring files from a personal laptop or personal workstation up to compute resources like those on ALCF is a common use case, let's go ahead and set up a Globus Connect personal endpoint so we have that. For those new to Globus, our how-to page is on our doc site is an excellent source of information. Not only is there information on what I'm about to show you and what I just showed you, but there's also information on how to install and configure Globus Connect Personal for various operating systems. So in order to install Globus Connect Personal, just first go to the Endpoints menu here, click on that. Up here, create a personal endpoint, click on that. We can download Globus Connect Personal. In this case, I'm running Mac OS, so it's going to download that application for me. When I run the Globus Connect Personal application, it's going to ask me to log in, And here what it's trying to do is it's saying, is it okay if I use your ALCF identity, which you just used to authenticate to the web app, to create Globus Connect personal collections, view your identity, all the things that it needs to do to set up a Globus Connect personal endpoint. I'm going to give it a label. Let's call it Greg's ALCF GCP. This way I know what my identities are being used for, and I can go and I can actually rescind those consents if I want to later. But let's go ahead and allow, and so here we go. So it's login successful. It's going to say, please continue with your Globus Connect personal setup. Notice it's using my ALCF identity, so let's give it a collection name. I'm going to use that same string here, Greg's ALCF GCP. I can give it a description if I want. Do not click this high assurance box unless you truly know what you're doing. If you're using a high assurance subscription, if you're using the Argonne high assurance subscription and you want to run a high assurance endpoint, then go ahead, by all means do that. You're going to have to manage your Globus Connect personal endpoint under that high assurance subscription. But if you don't know what you're doing and you click that, chances are your Globus Connect personal endpoint will not work. So I am not going to click that, and I'm going to click Save. And there we go. That's it. That's all there is to it. My Globus Connect personal endpoint is now set up, and I'm going to go ahead and exit the setup. You'll notice up here in my taskbar, again, I'm running Mac OS, so your mileage may vary. If I click on the taskbar, I can see it's Greg's ALCF GCP, just like I named it. And it gives me the opportunity here to do a couple of things. In the Preferences menu, I can set it up so access is restricted to particular directories on my Mac, but I'm just going to let this fall into my root directory here. And in the general category here, if you click on delete, if you need to get rid of Globus Connect Personal and want to uninstall it, use this, delete Globus Connect Personal configuration and exit. Don't try and remove Globus Connect Personal from your laptop or from your personal workstation any other way. So there we go. So Globus Connect Personal is now set up on my laptop. Okay, so back in the File Manager window, let's do a transfer from Theta to our laptop. So in order to do that, we need to bring up our newly created Globus Connect personal endpoint. And if I click on the search window here, that's going to take me to recents. And if I click on your collections, those are all the collections owned by me. And sure enough, that ALCF GCP is going to appear. I'm going to click on that. And here's my local files on my local laptop. Sure enough, this and this essentially match. I'm actually going to dig down into this directory, this Globus endpoint directory, so I don't have to go searching for files. And if I click on file 3 here and I start that transfer, that should again happen very quickly. If I refresh that, sure enough, file 3 just got transferred up. And as one would expect, if I look at the local directory on my laptop, sure enough, there's file 3. This, of course, works in the other direction. So if you have a file on your laptop that you want to transfer up, like, for instance, my slides from today, just click on those, click Start here, and it's going to now transfer from my laptop up to Theta. And if I refresh here, you'll notice that it is indeed transferred up. So the last thing I'll show you are some endpoints that are available to you for testing. The good folks at ESNet have provided us with endpoints out there, these read-only test endpoints at various locations around the world. And you can see here they contain files and directories full of files of various sizes. This is really great for when you've set up your endpoint and you want to do some testing. The other endpoints I'll show you are the Globus tutorial endpoints. There's Globus Tutorial Endpoint 1 and 2. Globus Tutorial Endpoint 2 allows you to transfer into. So if you want to do a test transfer and you haven't set up GCP or you don't have another endpoint available yet, here's this file 1. I'm going to go ahead and transfer that. And sure enough, you'll see that has transferred up to Globus Tutorial Endpoint 2. And those are available to you as well. So to close out here, I'll talk a little bit about some of the platform services. I mentioned the Commandline Interface, one of my very favorite things about Globus. I use it all the time myself. As I mentioned, very scriptable. If you're a shell scripter like me, you'll just love the Commandline Interface. There's some references listed here. It's actually open source and available on our GitHub site if you want to download it and hack it up. And then our doc site has some great resources of not only how to install it, but how to use it. So not only do we give you that command line interface for research data automation, but we also expose our API set. And this is the very same APIs that are consumed by both the web app and the command line interface. And so you can do things like integrate file transfer, sharing capabilities into your web apps, portals, gateways, all things that you may be building. Not only do we expose our transfer API, but we also expose our auth API. So if you like the way we do things using existing institutional identities for authentication, you can use our auth API to do the same thing. So we're not just all talk. Folks have used our API to actually do things like implement data portals, research gateways out in the wild. And I'll leave you here. If you choose to go down the API route or use the command line interface, I'm going to leave you with some references here. Just a great set of references for you to get a jump start on being able to use our platform services to help automate your workflows. So the last thing I'll leave you with is some documentation and links as to where to go if you'd like to find out more about what we talked about today. At the Globus documentation site, docs.globus.org is fantastic. There's documentation on every aspect of Globus there. We've got a YouTube channel, and we're really starting to populate that with a lot of instructional videos. So I definitely encourage you to go there and take a look at some videos. The help desk and issue escalation, if you ever have a question, please do not hesitate to send an email to support@globus.org. It will open up a Zendesk ticket, and our support staff, who are the absolute best in the business, will take care of you with great haste. We've also got mailing lists, and this is a little bit of a community involvement model. If you wish to talk to others in the Globus community via our mailing list is a great way to do that. And lastly, the customer engagement team. That's me and the other people that I work with in the customer team. And we're always happy to do deeper dives into everything we've talked about today. So thanks for watching. On to sharing an eagle.